The hunt for a missing 17-year-old girl escalates near Wenatchee. 72 agonizing hours have passed since McKenzie Cowell vanished after leaving her beauty school. Tonight, a devastating discovery out of Douglas County. The body of 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell has been recovered from the banks of the Columbia River. Authorities are withholding details about what was found at the scene and inside a home just 30 yards from where her body lay. A man is now in custody for the murder of 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell. The suspect is a 29-year-old man who was a classmate of McKenzie's at the Beauty Academy. Police allege that this man, Christopher Wilson, departed the school at the same time as McKenzie on the final day she was seen alive. On February 9th, 2010, 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell stepped through the rear exit of the Wenatchee Academy of Hair Design at 3 p.m. She mentioned to someone she was just taking a 15-minute break, a perfectly normal action on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. At 3:42 p.m., she sent a text to her boyfriend. The message was a simple, casual chat. Then, there was only silence. After that message, her phone was never active again. At 8 p.m., her father received a chilling phone call from the police. Her vehicle had been located in Pitcher Canyon, miles from the school. The car was locked. Her bag and clothes were still inside, but her phone, her keys, and her bank cards were all missing. Etched in the snow was a single set of footprints leading away from the car. Ominously, none led toward it. 4 days later, she was discovered deceased. She was still clothed in her beauty school uniform. She had been brutally beaten, stabbed, and strangled. Her system was clean of any drugs or alcohol. Investigators found no signs of sexual assault. In a horrific post-mortem act, her killer had tried to sever her arm. A serrated blade was still embedded in her shoulder. Fragments of duct tape were found nearby. At that moment, the case transformed from a missing child report into a horrifying murder investigation. The inquiry exploded into a massive operation. More than 800 people were subjected to interviews. Thousands of pages of phone records were analyzed. Detectives painstakingly scoured Facebook and MySpace accounts, desperate for any possible lead. One informant came forward claiming to have witnessed a snuff film of McKenzie's murder. She even implicated 2 men by name. She presented a ring she insisted belonged to McKenzie. Investigators pursued the lead, but the men's alibis were unbreakable. The supposed video never surfaced. 7 long months dragged on with no breaks in the case. Then, a letter from a jail cell changed the entire investigation. A new informant pointed the finger at one person, Christopher Wilson, age 29. He had been a student at the same academy. He resided just blocks away. On the very day McKenzie went missing, he walked out of the same back doors less than 2 minutes after she did. He had no alibi. 3 separate witnesses later informed detectives they had seen a thin man with dark hair and a long coat near the location where her car was abandoned. The description was a chilling match for Christopher Wilson. Wilson denied absolutely everything, insisting he barely knew her. He even voluntarily submitted a DNA sample, as if he had nothing to conceal. But his DNA was a perfect match to evidence recovered from the duct tape found near her body. He also swore he had never once set foot in that remote canyon. The instant investigators confronted him with the DNA match, he immediately requested legal counsel. New search warrants were executed. Inside his apartment, police discovered a substantial amount of McKenzie's blood saturating the carpet. Wilson tried to explain the dark stain as nothing more than spilled water. Just water. Investigators concluded that she had been murdered inside his apartment. On his computer, they found photos of a female acquaintance posing on the exact same piece of carpet. A video also showed him inspecting the apartment for cleanliness right before he moved out. That detail was deeply disturbing. The charge was elevated to first-degree murder. He was now facing the possibility of 26 years in prison. He initially rejected a plea bargain that offered only 6 years, but just before the trial began, he demanded the deal back. He argued the jury already perceived him as guilty, and he stood no chance. In the end, he pleaded guilty to charges of first-degree manslaughter and robbery. In 2012, he was given a sentence of more than 14 years behind bars. In 2023, after serving between 11 and 12 years, he was released. A 17-year-old student went outside for a 15-minute break. Only hours later, her car was found abandoned in a desolate canyon. A few days after that, her strangled body was found. This is a case about one short walk out a back door and the man who followed right behind her. And to truly comprehend this story, we must return to the very beginning. 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell resided in Wenatchee, Washington, a small, picturesque town in the state's center, situated right on the Columbia River. It's the kind of community where everybody seems to know everybody else, a place where life on the surface feels deceptively quiet, almost peaceful. Wenatchee is hailed as the apple capital of the world, a title earned from the countless orchards encircling it. Acres upon acres of apple trees are woven into the very fabric of the town's identity. It is a combination of small town serenity, breathtaking mountain views, and rugged outdoor life. You are able to walk the riverfront, hike through the Cascade foothills, and get out on the water during the summer. And when winter descends, the thrill of skiing and snowboarding is just a short drive into the mountains. It's an ideal haven. Whether you're traversing Washington state on a road trip or seeking a tranquil weekend retreat deep in the heart of nature, I have to ask, where are you all watching from? What time is it on your side of the globe right now? I'm fascinated to see our global audience. Sound off in the comments with your city and what time it is. And while you're doing that, let's continue. Mackenzie's life was divided between two homes, her mother's and her father's. With high school graduation just around the corner, she had already taken the first steps toward her career, enrolling in cosmetology courses to train as a hairstylist. She had a clear plan and was laser focused, but her world was also filled with the rhythm of music and the energy of dance. As a member of the Applettes, her school's dance team, she was a familiar face, performing at community parades and local festivals. To put it simply, she was more than just a student. She was a force engaged, energetic, and embracing every moment of her life. Friends and family remember a kind, effervescent girl who never met a stranger she could talk to absolutely anyone. Above all, she was devoted to her family. Time had molded her into a confident person, but this newfound strength was born from a painful struggle. She carried the heavy burden of a misaligned bite, a condition she desperately hoped to fix with surgery. That condition subjected her to relentless bullying for years. That kind of cruelty doesn't just disappear. It embeds itself in who you become. Her pastor once shared, every single day, she endured mockery from someone, but she would never allow them the satisfaction of her shame. The constant harassment didn't break her. It fortified her resolve. Her dad would speak with awe about her relentless drive. Her day began shortly after 6 in the morning, and she wouldn't return home until 12 hours later, after a packed schedule of classes and dance practice, modeling gigs, and on top of all that, she had just begun taking courses at the Wenatchee Academy of Hair Design for extra credits. Her drive and focus were astonishing, particularly for a person so young. Her heart belonged to Wim Visano, who was completely devoted to her. You would almost never find one without the other. For McKenzie Cowell, every piece of her life seemed to be clicking perfectly into place. The future she had worked so hard for was finally taking shape. Then came February 9th, 2010. Her father, Reed, was looking forward to a simple dinner at home, a rare, quiet evening for just the two of them. With Mackenzie's hectic schedule, these moments of connection over a meal were precious. Reed was aware that her classes at the academy were scheduled to finish at 5 p.m., but on this day, the expected call announcing she was heading home never came. That was the first red flag. Nearly 40 minutes later, he picked up the phone to try her himself. There was no ring, just the immediate jump to her voicemail greeting. In his own words, it was the precise moment a deep, icy fear took root inside him. 1 hour bled into the next. By 8 p.m., the worry had escalated to panic. Just as the family was moments from dialing the police, a call came in, but it was from law enforcement. An officer informed Reed they discovered his old car, the one his daughter typically drove, out in Pitcher Canyon. The location was miles from the Beauty Academy, a place she had no reason to be. Reed confirmed for the officers that his daughter had been behind the wheel that afternoon. The officer's next words were chilling. The vehicle was deserted. There was no sign of anyone. Without a second's hesitation, Reed raced to the scene. He arrived to a scene of biting cold and absolute darkness. As the first flakes of snow started to cling to the frozen ground, the area was profoundly isolated, not the kind of place someone finds themselves by chance, and certainly not after dark. Miles of serpentine roads snaked through the dark hills, far from the glow of any streetlights. The vehicle itself was situated unnaturally, as if someone had made a conscious effort to keep it out of sight. As he drew near, the pulsing red and blue of police lights was the only thing piercing the blackness. It was then that the full, horrifying weight of the moment hit him. The vehicle was locked. Peering inside, they spotted McKenzie's bag and some of her clothes. After police unlocked the doors, they discovered the most critical items were absent. Her keys, cell phone, and bank cards had all vanished. Etched in the thin layer of snow was a solitary set of footprints, moving away from the car and into the darkness. The implication was clear. Whoever had left the car here had been alone. And so began the desperate search for McKenzie Cowell, born on a night her father would later remember as unending, dark, and filled with a terrible sense of foreboding. Tonight, authorities in Chelan County are asking for the public's help in locating a missing 17-year-old. McKenzie Cowell was last spotted this past Tuesday in Wenatchee as she left beauty school. Her car surfaced several hours later, a staggering 40 miles away from her home. For more on the search, we're joined live in the studio by Annie Bishop of KXY4. Annie, it sounds like an exhaustive search is underway. That's right. The steep terrain surrounding the discovery site has been combed over multiple times by search parties on foot, with canine units, and from the air, yet it has yielded nothing. And this is precisely why we are urging everyone watching to please study her photograph carefully tonight. Detectives are counting on a tip from the public that someone out there has seen McKenzie and holds the key to her safe return. Here are the key details. McKenzie's 2000 Pontiac Grand Prix was discovered abandoned off Pitcher Canyon Road around 7 o'clock Tuesday night, 40 miles from her home in Orondo. Inside the car, detectives located her purse and clothes, but her debit card was gone. Despite a full forensic analysis by the Washington State Crime Lab, the car yielded no clues or anything that seemed amiss. McKenzie is now officially an endangered missing person, but the circumstances of her vanishing failed to trigger an Amber Alert. Tonight, a task force of 5 FBI agents and 7 detectives is desperately trying to reconstruct what happened to McKenzie. But this case is an anomaly. Everything in McKenzie's background screams that this should not have happened. She wasn't a girl with problems. She was a top student, bright and deeply involved in her community. And in a place like this, a violent child abduction is an almost unheard of crime. McKenzie stands 5'8", weighs 110 pounds, with deep brown eyes and brown hair. She has braces, and both of her ears are pierced. If you hold any clue, you are urged to contact the tip line at 509-667-6848. We are now told an FBI profiler is en route from Washington, D.C., tasked with creating a profile of McKenzie and, more urgently, of a potential predator. At this moment, they have no person of interest. Moore warned me that every parent in this town should be gripped with fear until they know McKenzie's fate. Reporting live, Annie Bishop, KXLY 4HD News. Investigators circled back to the Beauty Academy, where McKenzie's classmates remembered her saying she was just stepping out for a moment. She mentioned taking a 15-minute break and was even careful enough to ask if she needed to clock out. And there it was. Surveillance footage confirmed she walked out the back entrance at 3 p.m. Precisely. She offered no destination, but at the time, no alarms were raised. It was just a brief respite. Perfectly ordinary. But then, at 3:42 p.m., her boyfriend's phone lit up with a text from her. "Hey, what's up?" He replied with a simple, normal chat. After that, her phone went silent. The messages ceased completely. That appears to be the last signal ever sent from her phone. Her debit card held about $20, money she typically used for small incidentals. Yet in the critical days that followed, the account was frozen in time. Not a single charge was made. Then a lead emerged. 3 locals came forward, claiming to have seen a tall, gaunt man with stark black hair, cloaked in a long dark coat, walking down from the very road where McKenzie's car was discovered. Their sighting was placed between 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. Law enforcement immediately began the mammoth task of sifting through more than 1,000 pages of McKenzie's phone data. Warrants were also executed, granting them access to her entire digital life on Facebook and MySpace. One reporter would later confess that from the very beginning, something felt deeply wrong. The police never once suggested she might be a runaway. That omission was a deafening clue. Even in the first hours, the implication was clear. This was not a teenager who had simply vanished on her own. This felt much, much darker. The hunt intensified near Wenatchee for the missing 17-year-old girl. It has now been 72 agonizing hours since McKenzie Cowell was last seen walking out of that beauty school in Wenatchee. And for the fourth time this week, FBI agents and local detectives have scoured the desolate area where her car was abandoned, yet have unearthed nothing that leads them to McKenzie or to an answer. Her face is on flyers now, plastered across every wall. In Wenatchee, a desperate hope that someone might recognize her or her car. After 4 agonizing days of searching, the investigation took a sickening turn, and the public's worst nightmares were realized. We begin tonight with harrowing news out of Douglas County, where the body of 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell was discovered on the shores of the Columbia River. Authorities are remaining silent about what they uncovered at the scene and inside a home located a mere 30 yards from the body. The exact location of her murder is still unknown. We are counting on the autopsy and the forensic investigation happening tomorrow at the hospital to provide us with some definitive conclusions. The sheriff refuses to classify their findings as evidence, calling them only clues in the expanding search. A search that, at this point, has no suspects. She was found still clad in her beauty school uniform. The attack was savage. She was beaten, stabbed, and finally strangled. The medical examiner confirmed her system was clean of any drugs or alcohol. The report also confirmed she had not been the victim of a sexual assault. But a far more grisly detail was about to emerge. After she was dead, her attacker attempted to sever her arm. A serrated knife was found driven into her shoulder. Near her remains, investigators also found torn pieces of duct tape. Today, dive teams plunged back into the river near where her body was recovered. They have systematically searched the whole resort area of Crescent Bar. Still, they have no one in their sights. Investigators admit her killer could be an acquaintance, or worse, a complete stranger who preys in the dark. McKenzie Cowell's body was pulled from the Columbia River this morning. As word of the horror spread via text message through Wenatchee High School, a single desperate prayer was shared: find her killer. The hunt for clues has now exploded across 2 eastern Washington counties. Today, detectives tore through McKenzie's cell phone history, but the digital trail ran cold. From the very beginning, law enforcement understood the staggering scale of the task ahead. The mission had shifted. Hope for a rescue was gone, replaced by the grim reality of a manhunt. Nearly 1,800 mourners came together to honor the 17-year-old's memory. The sheer size of the crowd was a testament to the profound shock that had fractured the town. The investigation quickly outgrew local capabilities, compelling detectives to call for backup. The FBI was brought in. To spearhead the effort, the McKenzie Cowell Task Force was formed, pooling expertise and manpower from the entire region. The scope of the operation had gone national. Following standard procedure, the investigation zeroed in on her inner circle, starting with McKenzie's boyfriend. Next, they turned their attention to Joey, the boyfriend of her mother, Wendy. Authorities confirmed that her parents were never suspects. Wim consented to a lie detector test, only to later admit that he had stumbled on a critical question. That admission, unsurprisingly, set off alarm bells. The question posed to him was direct: do you have knowledge of who murdered McKenzie? He would later recount that this was the very question they claimed he had failed. Despite the result, he was adamant, claiming total ignorance about the perpetrator's identity. His responses were vague, filled with nothing but disorientation. He repeatedly stated he was incapable of even speculating on a potential suspect. He offered no names, no hypotheses whatsoever. Eyewitnesses from that time described a man who appeared utterly crushed by the weight of it all, frazzled, depleted, and teetering on the brink. He was volatile and profoundly disturbed. A report surfaced suggesting that on the eve of her disappearance, McKenzie and Joey had engaged in a heated dispute. This piece of information instantly piqued the investigators' interest. In such cases, even the smallest disagreements can escalate into powerful motives. However, after a thorough vetting process, both Joey and Wim were exonerated. Their stories checked out, their alibis solid. The initial lines of inquiry had crumbled. The detectives were forced to expand their search once more. They were essentially starting over, but now with a much wider net. A handful of potential avenues emerged. Several leads showed initial promise, yet each one ultimately led to a dead end. There was no conclusive evidence, no critical break in the case. Then, a new voice entered the investigation. Liz Reed, a woman with a past in dealing and addiction who had since turned confidential informant for the police. She professed to hold a piece of knowledge so explosive it could alter the entire trajectory of the investigation. Her story was staggering. Liz implicated two reputed dealers, Sam and Emmanuel, asserting she had witnessed a recording of the final, brutal moments of Mackenzie's life. The act of murder, she alleged, had been captured on film. She explained the teenager's life was tragically cut short in a case of mistaken identity. Her killers believed she was another person entirely. The theory was horrifying, a cold, calculated execution that, if proven, would rewrite everything authorities thought they knew. Liz also relayed a chilling confession from Sam, who allegedly told her, "I choked the life out of her to make her quiet." Crucially, Liz described the instrument of death before that information was made public. For the task force, this was a detail too specific to ignore. She possessed knowledge that was strictly confidential to the investigation. It lent her account a disturbing credibility, but it also made detectives wary. How could she know such things? Then she produced a ring. This ring, Liz alleged, had belonged to Mackenzie. She contended that Emmanuel had dispatched her to the primary crime scene, a location separate from where the body was discovered, with instructions to recover that very piece of jewelry. If her claim was legitimate, it pointed to a second, undiscovered crime scene, a critical oversight from the initial phase of the investigation. A revelation of that magnitude would have changed everything, but a major inconsistency emerged. Not one person in Mackenzie's life could identify the ring. Her closest friends, her own family, those who knew her tastes in daily accessories insisted it was not hers. This cast a deep shadow of doubt on Liz's testimony. Simultaneously, investigators launched an exhaustive background check on the two men she accused, starting with their phone logs, location data, work schedules, their entire digital footprint. Every piece of evidence pointed to airtight alibis. The paper trail proved their innocence conclusively. In a later public statement, Emmanuel explained that he had been working diligently to rebuild his life. He spoke of maintaining consistent employment, embracing his duties, and dedicating himself to his young son. The allegations, he stated, had inflicted profound damage on both his career and his personal life. He vehemently refuted any connection to the crime, citing the validated proof that supported his alibi. Detectives also invested significant resources into finding the alleged video that Liz insisted was real. She was unwavering in her claim. She had witnessed the footage. They scoured every conceivable source: hard drives, online platforms, private messages. The search yielded nothing. No evidence of such a recording ever surfaced. As the investigation wore on, authorities grew increasingly skeptical of her account. Her story remained completely unsubstantiated by factual evidence. Ultimately, Liz withdrew her official testimony, yet even after this retraction, she maintained that the video was authentic and that she had personally viewed it. Her subsequent explanation was that she had backed down out of sheer terror, convinced that investigators would turn on her and frame her for the murder. Authorities countered, insisting they had never once pointed the finger at her. For the next 7 months, that lead went cold, but the investigation never faltered. Hundreds of tips were chased down. More than 800 people were questioned. Every single message, every call, every name was meticulously vetted. The work was grueling, painstaking, and methodical. Piece by piece, detectives assembled their case with extreme caution. Reed voiced his absolute faith in the investigative team. He was certain they were leaving no stone unturned. He trusted that every single detail, no matter how insignificant, was being thoroughly examined, believing it would ultimately deliver the answers his family so desperately craved. On 11 at 11, a local mother finally breaks her silence on the unsolved slaying of her teenage daughter. For over 3 months now, the haunting murder of 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell has gripped her city with terror, baffled investigators, and shattered the heart of her mother. And tonight, she is making a desperate plea for justice. I am certain someone out there knows who did this, and my family and I need you to come forward with that person's name. From the very start, we were instructed to remain silent about the case. We couldn't risk compromising the integrity of the investigation. The only thing more agonizing than losing a child is knowing their killer walks free. But now, in a stunning turn this week, after police publicly confirmed no one in the Cowell family was a person of interest, detectives encouraged Mackenzie's mother to speak with Cairo 7, hoping her words might compel new witnesses to step out of the shadows. Even a seemingly foolish tip could be the breakthrough they need. They're sitting on a mountain of evidence. All they're missing is the one crucial tip. Investigators have pursued 750 leads. They have interrogated hundreds of individuals and collected DNA from dozens. Nothing has led them to the killer. The hope is that tonight's interview with Mackenzie's mom will finally crack the case wide open. We have a duty to honor the person she was and the woman she was destined to become, a future I will never get to witness. I'll never be a grandmother. Her brothers will never be uncles. That's why it is so critical for people to call that tip line. Then, a new figure stepped from the shadows, and his arrival dramatically shifted the investigation's focus. A police informant, a man named Theo Keyes, sent a letter to detectives from behind bars. It was crude and unpolished, yet the information inside was so specific that investigators had no choice but to take it seriously. That single letter completely altered the case's trajectory, steering it down an entirely new path. Theo pointed to a man he insisted demanded intense scrutiny. His one-time friend, 29-year-old Christopher Wilson, a name that would soon echo through the investigation. In the letter, Theo recounted a disturbing event that supposedly took place at a party. He alleged that Chris, suddenly and without provocation, began to choke a woman they both knew. The act was bizarre and terrifying, and then, just as abruptly, he released her and behaved as if nothing had occurred. No reason was given, no apology offered, as if it were just a fleeting, meaningless impulse. Theo also revealed that Christopher had been a student at the very same academy Mackenzie attended. Even more unsettling, his residence was just a few blocks from the school. The sheer proximity was enough to raise alarms. The same building, the same neighborhood, it spelled overlap. It spelled opportunity. Acquaintances described Chris as strange, somewhat eccentric, yet unfailingly quiet and polite. In his daily life, he showed no signs of overt aggression, and it was this sharp contrast that left people deeply unnerved. As further details emerged, the intrigue surrounding him intensified. He harbored a morbid fascination with death, with dead bodies, with the lore of serial killers. He had a tattoo of Hannibal Lecter and was an avid fan of the show Dexter. It was confirmed that Chris had been employed by several local funeral homes. An academy student later recounted a chilling conversation where he allegedly claimed to enjoy dismembering people during his work. It could have been a sick joke. The words could have been twisted out of context. But in the midst of a murder inquiry, a statement like that takes on a sinister weight. Another woman came forward alleging he once boasted about strangling a hotel guest with a belt. Was it a fabrication, a twisted attempt to shock, or something far more real? At the time, they were only claims, but together they began to weave a pattern that grew darker with each thread. Through it all, his mother was adamant that being different does not equate to being evil. She spoke of how people fear what they don't understand, how they rush to judge anything that doesn't fit a conventional mold. His best friend offered the same impassioned defense. They weren't seeing a monster from the headlines, they were seeing the person they knew and trusted. And as detectives methodically collected facts, constructed timelines, and analyzed evidence, a parallel reality was taking shape. It was the narrative of those who refused to accept that this story could possibly have the horrifying ending that was beginning to seem inevitable. He isn't without his flaws, but he's a good man, she insisted, portraying him as both kind-hearted and generous. Model. Those who knew Chris all said the same thing. He was an anomaly. In a town built on conformity, he refused to fit in. The ink-black hair, the sprawling tattoos, the defiant clothes, every part of him was a stark rebellion against the community's conservative grain. He commanded attention. He was unforgettable. But being an outcast doesn't make you a monster. An unusual appearance is not an admission of guilt. It simply isn't. And yet, the description from 3 separate witnesses of a thin man lurking where Mackenzie's car was found was a haunting echo of Chris. The similarity was too sharp to dismiss. It wasn't hard proof, but it was a heavy weight. On the day Mackenzie vanished, Chris was at the beauty academy. Security footage revealed he slipped out the very same back doors less than 120 seconds after she did. 2 minutes, a breath. But sometimes, that sliver of time is the space between life and death. Then, another chasm opened in his story. For the rest of that day, investigators could not place him anywhere. His timeline was a blank slate. No one could vouch for him. He'd sent a couple of texts to an ex-girlfriend, but his physical presence had vanished from the world. No alibi, only a gaping void that screamed for an explanation. Yet, Chris had no criminal history, Not a single prior conviction, nothing in his file to suggest a violent predator, forcing detectives to wonder, are we chasing another ghost? Are we building this entire case on nothing but shadow and suspicion? Chris issued a blanket denial. He insisted McKenzie was just another face at the academy, a virtual stranger to him. He swore he barely knew her, that they had never once shared a meaningful exchange. He even presented his DNA for sampling, an act of seeming transparency meant to disarm them. But that was the moment everything changed. His DNA was a direct hit to the samples recovered from the duct tape found with her body. This was no longer a hazy eyewitness account. This was the irrefutable certainty of science. And considering the desolate remoteness of the crime scene, the possibility that his DNA was there by coincidence was virtually zero. The detectives gave him one last chance, an off-ramp. Was there any innocent reason he could have been there? Any story that would explain this? Chris's answer was ice cold. He'd never set foot there. Never. He denied ever being in that canyon, period. That's when they told him about the DNA. His composure cracked instantly. His next words, "I want a lawyer." The interview slammed shut, but detectives were already focused on his chilling fascination with the show Dexter. What truly disturbed them was the brutal fact that an attempt had been made to sever McKenzie's arm. In the series, the protagonist Dexter Morgan murders people, dismembers them, and sinks their bodies into the Atlantic Ocean. Being a fan of a television show proves nothing, but in the heart of a murder investigation, the gruesome parallel cast a dark and menacing pall over everything. Ultimately, authorities decided they had what they needed. They arrested him on suspicion of second-degree murder. When confronted with the charge, his face remained a blank mask. He just stared through the detectives, his eyes empty and distant. No fury, no fear, just a profound emptiness. In this story, his silence was the most terrifying confession of all. A man is now in custody for the murder of 17-year-old McKenzie Cowell. The suspect is a 29-year-old man who attended the same beauty school as the victim. Police report that this man, Christopher Wilson, departed the school at the exact same time as McKenzie on the final day she was ever seen alive. KXY4's Tori Brunetti is in Wenatchee tonight with the break that finally shattered this case. For 8 long months, her family and this entire community were left in the dark, haunted by the question of who took her life. There were few developments and hundreds of leads that went nowhere, until a critical DNA match surfaced last month. Tonight, police declare they have arrested her killer. Earlier today, the McKenzie Cowell Task Force apprehended 29-year-old Christopher Scott Wilson at his residence, located in the apartment below the salon you see behind me. They confirm it was DNA evidence, lifted from duct tape found where they recovered Cowell's body, that led them directly to this arrest. Investigators say Wilson was a student at the Academy of Hair Design with Cowell, but her friends are adamant that she and Wilson were not friends. People acquainted with both of them say he came across as a perfectly normal, even nice, individual. He even appeared at Cowell's memorial service, where he was seen consoling her closest friends. Friends and family say they are overcome with relief that an arrest has been made, but are absolutely shattered that the suspect is Wilson. The task force states they have a mountain of work still ahead. Their primary objective now is to forge a motive. In Wenatchee, Tori Brunetti, KXY 4HD News. The investigation, meanwhile, did not pause for a single moment. Detectives swarmed his previous apartment, executing a second, more desperate search. Every inch, every crevice, every microscopic detail was put under the lens. At the same time, forensic teams were systematically dismantling his electronic life, beginning with his computer. They dug through storage drives, hunting for any digital breadcrumb or encrypted secret. The deeper their search went, the darker the abyss became. Model. Then, there was the dark spot on the carpet, a detail Chris had casually dismissed. He claimed it was just bong water. A simple accident, he insisted, nothing more. But to the detectives, it was anything but trivial. They cut out that section of the carpet and rushed it to the lab. The wait for the results was agonizing, but the report left no room for doubt. The stain was McKenzie's blood. And it wasn't just a trace, it was a massive pooling. The sheer volume pointed to a catastrophic bleeding event right there on that floor. This single fact shifted the entire investigation, giving police a chilling certainty. McKenzie died in that apartment. What had been a location of interest was now believed to be the primary crime scene. The walls, The floor, every mundane object in the room screamed with sinister new meaning. And yet, the shadows of the unknown still loomed large. Had Mackenzie and Chris ever really talked before that fateful day? No one could say for sure. The mystery of how she even got to his apartment was a complete blank. A search of their social media revealed no public connection, no friendship. Outwardly, they were strangers. But her father, Reed, was unshakable in his conviction about one thing. He knew his daughter. She would never, ever go with someone she felt uneasy about. This deep-seated belief only deepened the mystery. Was there a secret connection? A hidden friendship that nobody else had ever noticed? Or was the truth something else entirely? Did they have conversations at school, away from prying eyes? Was it a clandestine bond, or something far more sinister? Was she coerced, tricked into walking into a trap? To this day, those questions hang in the air, unanswered. The uncertainty is a ghost that refuses to leave. Long after the case files are closed, a quiet disquiet remains, an echo that never truly fades. Then, a stunning development. Wenatchee police made a second arrest in the murder of McKenzie Cowell. Now, 22-year-old Tessa Maria Skyleman was in custody. The case, already a labyrinth of darkness, had just taken another shocking turn. The announcement came without warning, igniting a firestorm of speculation. 22-year-old Tessa Skylon, an associate of Chris, was arrested, facing charges of first-degree criminal assistance and obstruction of justice. A name once relegated to the periphery was now thrust into the spotlight. The evidence detectives revealed came from Chris's own computer, a collection of photographs. These weren't just any pictures. They showed Tessa posing on the precise section of the floor where Mackenzie's blood had soaked the carpet. It was a chilling discovery. The very ground identified as a crime scene was now the backdrop for a photo shoot. What could have been dismissed as innocent snapshots now felt heavy with sinister implication. But Tessa had a story of her own. She claimed Chris was the one behind the camera, swearing she was completely oblivious to the fact she was standing over that gruesome spot. In her telling of events, the location's evidentiary significance was unknown to her, and she was baffled by the accusation that these photos proved her guilt. Her narrative was a direct counterpoint to the growing cloud of suspicion, but the truth of what those images represented would be decided by a jury. But that wasn't all. Detectives unearthed a video, filmed as Chris was vacating the apartment. Every single frame was scrutinized. In the footage, his voice is heard asking Tessa a simple question: "Does it look clean?" Those 5 words would become a focal point of the entire case. To the prosecution, it was a damning question, a veiled confirmation that a cover-up had occurred. The defense, however, would paint it as utterly mundane, the innocent question of a tenant trying to leave a clean apartment. The words themselves were ambiguous. Everything hinged on context. This discovery had just tangled the web even further. It cast another shadow of doubt, reinforcing the chilling certainty that this dark, unsettling story held more secrets just below the surface. Video me. Just back up. You got it? Go ahead, roll it. I'm just looking it over. Does it look clean? Clean for what went down? Considering. Yeah. It's clean, all things considered. As the recording plays, the camera lens deliberately pushes in, focusing on the very patch of carpet where the bloodstains were discovered. Chris later claimed he filmed the video as a form of insurance before he moved out proof of cleaning to guarantee the return of his security deposit. On its face, the explanation seems plausible. It's something countless renters do every single day. The Wenatchee Police Department took the 22-year-old into custody last night, booking her on charges of rendering criminal assistance and obstructing the investigation into Mackenzie's murder. Investigators uncovered something horrifying. Photographs of her playing dead, sprawled on the very floor of Wilson's apartment where Mackenzie met her end, a location later confirmed by traces of the victim's blood. The same search warrant yielded 2 disturbing videos from a cell phone, showing Skyleman moving through that very apartment. In the footage, she deliberately focuses the camera on the precise locations where investigators would later discover Mackenzie's DNA. Despite this damning evidence, Skyleman insisted she knew nothing about what had befallen the murdered teenager. Police confirmed she made bail, but in a stunning turn, despite her arrest, Tessa would never face formal charges. For Chris, the price of freedom was set at $1 million, and he proclaimed his innocence with a plea of not guilty. The man charged with murdering the 17-year-old Wenatchee girl stood before a judge in a crowded courtroom and declared he was not guilty. The charge against you, sir, is murder in the second degree. Your plea? Not guilty. The moment Christopher Wilson entered the Chelan County courtroom, his mother broke down in tears, but she was far from his only supporter. He is innocent. I just don't believe he could have done it. A friend of Wilson's, who asked to remain anonymous, was one of a surprising number of young women convinced he was not a killer. I can't wrap my head around why he's the one being accused. For Robin Jones, one of McKenzie Cowell's closest friends, it was baffling that their mutual classmates could so easily accept Wilson's claims of innocence. McKenzie is the one who suffered. She never asked to be kidnapped. She never asked to be viciously killed or to be discarded on the banks of the Columbia River. She was only 17, a guiltless, dynamic, and brilliant young woman. Authorities confirmed that crucial evidence remained under analysis at the crime lab. We are constantly sending more items for forensic testing, and we are still questioning individuals connected to Mr. Wilson. But the one piece missing from the puzzle was a motive, leaving Cowell's friends to grapple with the unknown. I am convinced this had nothing to do with McKenzie personally. It was a twisted, disturbed individual, and she was simply an easy target. From the outset, Chris's legal team launched a powerful, aggressive, and calculated defense. They immediately moved to suppress specific details, arguing they would sway the jury with emotion instead of facts. A palpable tension filled the courtroom. Every single word carried immense weight. In a key decision, the judge forbade the prosecution from mentioning Wilson's employment at funeral homes or his tattoo of Hannibal Lecter. The judge determined that this information could create an unfair bias, painting a sinister picture of the defendant that had no direct link to the actual evidence. Leading his defense was the renowned attorney, John Henry Brown, a name that commanded respect throughout the legal world. His past clients included Colton Harris Moore, famously known as the Barefoot Bandit, and even the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. The mere presence of such a high-profile lawyer signaled a fierce battle ahead. It was obvious the defense would stop at nothing, and then they took it a step further. They floated a shocking theory that the crime scene was a setup. The defense insinuated that police themselves might have planted McKenzie's blood. It was an explosive allegation, designed to cast a shadow of doubt not on their client, but on the integrity of the investigation itself. In another bold move, they pointed the finger at Sam and Emmanuel, the very same men Liz had once accused as the potential true murderers. The defense's objective was unmistakable: inject reasonable doubt at every turn and construct an entirely different version of events. Chris's own mother declared publicly that she was convinced her son was the victim of a conspiracy. She claimed he was framed. Her conviction was passionate, resolute, and unwavering. But the defense had another critical point to hammer home. Not a trace of Chris's DNA was discovered inside McKenzie's vehicle, nor was it on the blade found with her body. This point was driven home again and again in court, a constant reminder of what the prosecution lacked. Then there was the issue of the ring Liz had turned over to police. The defense alleged it was a perfect match to a ring seen on McKenzie in a photo, but the prosecution fired back, stating there was no concrete proof to back up the assertion. The photograph itself was blurry, and more importantly, McKenzie's closest friends and family insisted they had never seen the ring provided by Liz. It became a contentious point, an argument left hanging in the air with no clear resolution. In spite of these defensive maneuvers, the prosecution's confidence never wavered. They escalated the charge to murder in the first degree, claiming the evidence pointed to a premeditated act, a move that drastically raised the stakes. A conviction now meant Chris was looking at up to 26 years behind bars. That April, in 2011, he flatly rejected a plea bargain that offered a mere 6 years for first-degree manslaughter. The decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Considering the alternative, the deal was incredibly generous, yet he turned it down. Then, on the very eve of the trial, he abruptly reversed his position. Chris petitioned the court to bring back the 6-year deal. While still proclaiming his innocence, he cited deep concerns over the jury questionnaires. He claimed that an overwhelming number of potential jurors were already convinced of his guilt, making a fair trial, in his view, impossible. At that moment, the deal felt like his only safe harbor, a known outcome in a sea of terrifying unknowns. But the initial 6-year offer had already evaporated. And now, Mackenzie's family had a new, non negotiable demand: a public confession in his own voice. They needed to hear the truth from his own mouth. So in the courtroom, he began to read, "This is my statement. I did recklessly cause the death of McKenzie Cowell by strangulation and by stabbing her with a knife." The judge interjected, Mr. Wilson, is that your statement?" "Yes," the judge pressed. "And are those the things that you did?" Another yes. Yet despite that solemn confession before the court, Chris would later insist the entire written statement was a lie. His news story was that lawyers had concocted the words purely to secure a plea agreement. It was, he argued, a document of legal strategy, completely detached from reality. He now insisted he was the victim, framed from the very beginning. He claimed the prosecution's narrative was a work of fiction, that his role had been grotesquely distorted from day one. But the legal facts were sealed. He had pleaded guilty. The court record was brutally clear. Chris admitted to first-degree manslaughter and also confessed to first-degree robbery for stealing Mackenzie's phone. And in a separate, concurrent case, he admitted his guilt to an assault charge. Those confessions were the foundation for the final judgment. In May of 2012, the legal saga came to its grim conclusion. The 6-year offer was a distant memory. The court delivered its sentence under far harsher terms. He was given more than 14 years behind bars, with credit for time already served. Numbers were spoken into the silent courtroom numbers that measured the value of a human life. And everyone present was confronted with the brutal truth that no prison term could ever reverse the damage that had been done. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom after the verdict. Then, the unthinkable happened. Mackenzie's family and Chris's family moved toward one another in the center of the room and embraced. There were no loud pronouncements, no outbursts of anger, only raw exhaustion, profound grief, and the crushing weight of months trapped in a legal battle. They exchanged quiet apologies, a shared understanding that both their families had been shattered by a loss that could never be mended. But it was Mackenzie's family who left the room in awe. In the absolute darkest hour of their existence, they displayed a dignity that defied words. There was no trace of hatred in their voices, only shattering pain and an unbreakable, quiet strength that was the only thing holding them together. But the story was not over. Later, Chris launched an attempt to retract his guilty plea. He filed an appeal with the Washington Court of Appeals, desperate to overturn the ruling. It was futile. The appeal was denied. The conviction was final. For a long time, the legal battle seemed to be truly at its end. Then came the final days of 2023. For Mackenzie's family, the passage of time wasn't measured in years. It was measured by a devastating, permanent absence. 43-year-old Christopher Scott Wilson was released from prison, having served just 11.5 years. To some, that might sound like a significant sentence. To others, it feels like a fraction of what was owed. But for a family that lost their 17-year-old daughter, no amount of time could ever balance the scales of justice. 17 years old. That is barely the threshold of life. It is the dawn of independence, the birth of incredible dreams. And even at that young age, Mackenzie's sharp focus and relentless work ethic made her exceptional. She knew precisely where she was going. She built her plans meticulously. She pursued them, step by calculated step. Her boundless energy, her ferocious ambition, her stubborn resolve, it all pointed to a character still being forged, but one that was already formidable. She was built to conquer any obstacle in her path. Her bedroom remains a haunting time capsule, looking almost exactly as it did the morning she walked out for the last time. It is a place where time stands still. Her possessions are untouched, right where she left them. The small, ordinary objects of her daily life have now become priceless, sacred artifacts. The very air and the space seems to hold her rhythm, her dreams, her undeniable presence. To walk into that room is to be pulled back to a time before the anguish, to a simpler day, the last ordinary day of Mackenzie's life. She went to her classes, she worked her shift, she spoke with her boyfriend, she shared moments with her parents. A day that felt unremarkable then now feels like the final echo of peace. Her father, Reed, spoke of a wind chime he keeps hanging outside his home. It's a small detail, but it holds the weight of his world, and every time the wind makes it sing, he swears he can hear his daughter's voice. It's more than just metal on metal. It is the sound of memory cutting through the deafening silence. He says it's as though she is still close, still speaking to them in a secret language carried on the breeze, hidden within familiar sounds. Reed said, "You're my special gift from God. You will never leave my heart. I can't even believe how much I miss you."